Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea, Japan, and China are set to hold their first summit in more than 4 years next week in Seoul, hoping it'll serve as a turning point to completely restore and normalize the three-way cooperation system. South Korea's central bank keeps its interest rate steady for the 11th consecutive meeting at 3.5% amid inflation concerns. And due to high prices, the country's inflation-adjusted household income in the first quarter plunged by the largest amount in 7 years. Ireland, Norway, and Spain announced they'll formally recognize an independent Palestinian state next week, saying it's to achieve peace in the Middle East. But Israel criticized the announcement, describing it as a reward for terror. Good evening, it's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. Leaders of South Korea, Japan, and China are set to hold their first three-way summit in more than 4 years in Seoul next Monday, aiming to bolster cooperation. Our senior correspondent, Yoon, starts us off.
South Korea, Japan and China will hold their first trilateral summit in over 4 years, with the aim of fully restoring and normalizing their three-way cooperation on trade, climate response and interpersonal exchanges. Kim Tae-ho, South Korea's principal deputy national security advisor on Thursday, said President Yoon will hold three-way talks on Monday with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and Chinese Premier Li Qiang. The three are expected to focus on 6 main areas of cooperation, including people-to-people exchanges, climate change and sustainable development, health and aging demographics, as well as science and technology and disaster and safety response. According to a presidential official, their talks will be concluded with a joint statement, with Yoon, Kishida and Qiang possibly holding a joint press conference.
The Trilateral Summit will serve as a turning point to completely restore and normalize the three-way cooperation system. It will also serve as an opportunity to secure momentum for future-orientated and practical cooperation that will benefit the people of the three countries.
The three-way talks, stalled since December 2019, come amid strained relations over a number of bilateral disputes, on top of tensions in the Indo-Pacific region as the United States and China engage in geopolitical competition. After South Korea and Japan took major steps to patch up their differences last year and restored bilateral trade and security ties, Seoul has been pushing to revive their three-way talks with Beijing. While Yoon, Kishida and Qiang will also discuss regional issues and ways to respond to complex global crises, a presidential official told reporters they are unlikely to focus on contentious issues. These include North Korea's weapons cooperation with Russia and the possibility of Seoul and Tokyo joining the Security Pact by Australia, the United Kingdom and the US. Before the highly anticipated talks, the South Korean leader will hold separate summits with his counterparts on Sunday afternoon before a welcoming banquet. Yoon and Qiang will discuss strengthening strategic communication after months-long tension between the two countries, along with trade, investment and cultural ties. With Kishida, Yoon will address Korean Peninsular affairs, as well as regional and global issues, as well as their trilateral cooperation with the United States. Observers believe bilateral tensions over messenger app Line may also be raised. Under the mantra of South Korea, Japan, China plus X, Yoon's office says the three countries will aim to expand their scope of cooperation beyond Northeast Asia to the wider Indo-Pacific as well as the global level. Seoul, Arirang News.
Following the trilateral meeting, there will be other major diplomatic events at the top level. President Yoon will also be hosting UAE's president and dozens of leaders from Africa for broader cooperation with Korea. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
It's set to be the biggest welcoming ceremony hosted by President Yoon Suk-yeol. Next Tuesday, the President of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, will arrive in Seoul for a 2-day state visit, the first by a UAE president. According to the top office on Thursday, it'll include a Black Eagle air show, more than 600 military personnel, and 160 children.
When President Yoon Suk-yeol and his spouse made a state visit to the UAE in January last year, they were given a grand welcome at an official presidential welcoming ceremony with a large cavalry and camel troops lined up. Similarly, on May 28th, when the UAE president enters Korean airspace, we will also mobilize the highest level of courtesy and conduct various official welcoming ceremonies.
There will be various diplomatic events on top of an official summit at the Yongsan presidential office on Wednesday. The two countries have long enjoyed good cooperation, with the UAE being South Korea's only special strategic partnership country in the Middle East. In fact, during President Yoon's state visit to Abu Dhabi last year's January, the UAE pledged a $30 billion investment into South Korea.
The leaders of both countries plan to discuss concrete measures to elevate their cooperation to a higher level in the four key areas established during President Yoon's state visit to the UAE in January last year: traditional energy and clean energy, peaceful nuclear energy, economy and investment, and defense technology.
This state visit is highly anticipated. It was supposed to happen last October, but due to Hamas' surprise attack on Israel causing uncertainties in the Middle East, the UAE postponed. In the meantime, the upcoming Korea-Africa Summit, which will follow the UAE Summit, will be the biggest multilateral summit hosted by President Yoon. It's set to happen on June 4th and 5th. There will be 45 or more African nations coming to South Korea for the first summit of its kind.
This will serve as an opportunity to strengthen political, economic and social solidarity with African countries and to build favorable and practical cooperation in various economic security fields, particularly in key minerals, infrastructure, renewable energy, digital agriculture, health and tourism.
Under the national vision of becoming a global pivotal state, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration has emphasized strategic cooperation with the Global South, including Africa, since its early days. The top office says, adding to the Korea-Pacific Islands Summit last year, the Korea-Africa Summit will further expand the nation's strategic cooperation with the Global South. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol requested that former U.S. President Donald Trump's State Secretary Mike Pompeo to continue his interest and role in promoting Seoul-Washington relations. This as the two met at the Yongsan presidential office on Thursday in light of Pompeo's visit to Seoul for the 15th Asian Leadership Conference. The president added that the ROK-U.S. alliance has upgraded based on nuclear weapons and has recently expanded into an economic and advanced technology alliance. Pompeo, in response, said President Yoon's leadership has meant that the alliance is becoming even stronger, expressing his confidence it'll continue to develop regardless of domestic political situations in the United States, a possible reference to the upcoming U.S. presidential election between Biden and Trump. In other news, China has launched military drills surrounding Taiwan in what it calls a strong punishment for the separatist acts of seeking independence. This comes just days after the self-governing island's new president, Lai Ching-te, vowed to defend the island's sovereignty. The state-run Xinhua news agency quoted the Chinese military's Eastern Theater Command on Thursday that it started 2 days of joint military drills, mobilizing the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Rocket Force encircling Taiwan. A spokesman for the command also called the latest exercise a stern warning against intervention and provocation by external forces. Taiwan's defense ministry expressed regret over China's drills as irrational provocations and said that it'll uphold the sovereignty of Taiwan and defend the democracy of the island by dispatching ground, sea, and air forces in response to the exercise. Norway, Ireland, and Spain say they'll recognize Palestine as a state as they reportedly seek to push for peace in the Middle East. Israel immediately criticized their announcement. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Ireland, Norway, and Spain have announced they will officially recognize Palestine as a state next week. The European nations say Palestine has the right to create an independent state and expect other countries to join in. The leaders say they're taking joint action for the sake of peace in the Middle East. According to Norway's Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, recognizing Palestine is supporting moderate forces that are on a retreating front in a protracted and cruel conflict, calling it an investment in the only solution that can bring lasting peace in the Middle East. He also called on other countries to do the same in order to ensure that the process towards a two-state solution can build momentum. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of putting the two-state solution in danger with his policy of pain and destruction in Gaza, while Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris emphasized that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. The prime ministers of all three nations announced the official recognition will take place next Tuesday. Meanwhile, in response to the European nations' decision to recognize Palestine as a state, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu slammed the decision, calling it a prize for terrorism.
The intention of several European countries to recognize a Palestinian state is a reward for terrorism. This evil cannot be given a state. This would be a terrorist state. It will try to repeat the massacre of October 7th again and again. We will not consent to this. Rewarding terrorism will not bring peace, neither will it stop us from defeating Hamas.
144 out of 193 member states of the UN recognize Palestine as a state. However, Britain and Australia have recently indicated in recent months that they will also follow suit, while EU members Malta and Slovenia have also made such indications. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
On the local front, marking the 15th anniversary of former President Roh Moo-hyun's death, a memorial service took place at 2 p.m. on Thursday at Bongha Village in Gyeongsang-namdo Province, his final resting place. Attendees included former President Moon Jae-in and his wife, National Assembly Speaker Kim Jin-pyo, and Prime Minister Han Duk-soo. President Yoon Suk-yeol sent a wreath to commemorate the event. Leaders of the ruling and opposition parties were at the memorial service. At a morning meeting, People Power Party's interim leader Hwang Woo-yeol described No as a leader who emphasized unity and compromise in politics. Through a post on social media, Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung vowed to embrace No's belief that politics should change people's lives. President Yoon Suk-yeol has vowed to innovate regulations for the growth of small and medium-sized businesses. Such a remark came whilst the president was in attendance at the 2024 Korea Small and Medium Business Convention, which has been held for the last 3 years on the lawn of the Yongsan presidential office. Stressing the need for SMEs to thrive to create more jobs and improve people's livelihoods, President Yoon pledged to swiftly come up with programs for them to enter the global market. He added he would create a favorable business environment and further boost sales diplomacy. Around 500 people, including leaders from major conglomerates, including Samsung Electronics Executive Chairman Lee Jae-yong, participated in the event. South Korea's central bank has kept its benchmark interest rate frozen at 3.5% once again amid persisting inflationary pressure. Meanwhile, the country's growth outlook has been revised upward to 2.5% for this year, taking robust exports into account. Our finance correspondent Lee Soo-jin reports. South Korea's central bank kept its benchmark interest rate steady at 3.5% as widely expected amid ongoing concerns about inflation. The decision was announced on Thursday following the last Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the first half of the year.
While inflation is slowing, given the signs of recovery in economic growth, the exchange rate volatility, and geopolitical risks, we have decided to maintain our current monetary tightening stance.
This is the 11th consecutive meeting that the BOK has decided to freeze the rate. The base rate was last raised in January last year to 3.5%, the 10th consecutive rate hike. The rate freeze decision this month comes amid ongoing concerns about inflation. While the Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, fell below the 3% range in April for the first time since January, consumer prices saw on-year increases of 3.1% in February and March. Prices for agriculture goods, livestock, and fishery products were up 10.6% on-year in April. Fresh fruit saw huge price increases, with the price of apples up by more than 80% on-year and pears up by more than 100%. The BOK's decision was also influenced by the U.S. Central Bank in its most recent May meeting, deciding to keep interest rates unchanged as it's unlikely that the BOK will cut interest rates ahead of the United States, with the current interest rate gap at its largest ever at 2 percentage points.
If the interest rate differential is large, then you would see more capital flows going out of Korea. I think the Bank of Korea will wait until at least the end of the year to see whether the U.S. will lower their interest rate or not.
Meanwhile, the BOK also raised its economic growth outlook for this year to 2.5%, up from 2.1%, further adding to projections that the key interest rate will not be lowered for the time being. The BOK governor said that the forecast has been raised mainly because of external factors such as the robust global IT sector and strong growth in the U.S. economy, as well as signs of recovery in domestic demand. And this year's inflation forecast was maintained at 2.6%. Moving forward, the Bank of Korea says they will continue monitoring prices and geopolitical risks and will maintain a monetary tightening stance until it has more evidence that inflation is coming under control. 이수진, Arirang News.
Higher prices in the country have resulted in the sharpest fall in inflation-adjusted household income in the first quarter since 2017. Our Park Gun-woo explains.
South Korea's household income saw an increase in the first quarter of the year, but taking inflation into effect, inflation-adjusted income, or buying power, fell in the largest range in 7 years due to higher prices. According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, the monthly average income per household in Q1 was around 5.12 million won, or over $3,750, an increase of 1.4% year-on-year. But when considering inflation of 3% during that period, income dropped by 1.6% from the year before. This was the sharpest fall among all first quarters since 2017, when it dropped by 2.5%. Income earned through wages, the biggest part of household income, dropped 1.1% year-on-year. When adjusted for inflation, that figure fell by nearly 4% from the previous year, which was the highest drop ever since related data was first compiled in 2006.
The rise in consumer prices and slashed incentives given by major companies were the main factors behind this fall.
Data also showed that the monthly average amount of spending per household in the first quarter was nearly 2.91 million won, or over $2,100, up 3% year-on-year. They showed that people spend more on food and non-alcoholic beverages, along with on accommodation and entertainment. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
The trade dispute between the United States and China rumbles on, with Beijing being hit with a wave of new sanctions and Washington facing possible retaliation. Eyes are on how this could affect the global market, including South Korean firms. Our trade correspondent Moon Hae-ryun tells us more.
New steep tariffs announced by the Biden administration last week were met with mixed responses from the South Korean market, with some sectors such as the chip industry expecting to not be as affected as others. Trade tariffs on EVs from China are being quadrupled from 25% to 100%, and chips face a doubling of the duties already in place to 50%.
Because we're not going to let China flood our market, making it impossible for American auto manufacturers to compete fairly. We're also implementing a 25% tariff on electric vehicle batteries from China and a 25% tariff on critical minerals that make those batteries.
Regulations for Chinese-made connected vehicles are also expected to be announced this fall, regulating vehicles such as smart cars with autonomous driving and vehicles with wireless navigation software, over concerns of Beijing collecting personal data through connected vehicles. With higher tariffs on Chinese-produced vehicles, domestic electric vehicle companies could take advantage of this gap in the American market. South Korea's exports in the first quarter of the year have already reflected this trend, with data from the Bank of Korea showing that the value of outbound shipments to the U.S. overtook those to China for the first time in 21 years. But one expert says that this is only temporary, as Washington seeks domestic production of goods.
Until the construction of those factories are complete, Korean firms may be able to export more to the United States, but once those factories come online, Korean companies may lose their advantage in the American market.
Another factor that needs to be taken into account is the possibility of Chinese companies diverting exports to markets in Europe or other Asian countries. This could lead to South Korean firms facing much tougher competition in these markets, especially for the steel industry. For companies such as POSCO and Hyundai Steel that will have to compete with the much cheaper Chinese steel. In response, the South Korean government submitted a statement at the end of last month to the U.S. Department of Commerce, expressing its concerns regarding the uncertainty around how the country's firms could be affected. The Trade Ministry also set up meetings with the automobile, battery and steel industries last week, pledging its support for diversifying supply chains and raising the country's competitiveness in the global market. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Now on the cultural front. The Culture Ministry has announced new strategies to expand the global reach of Korean culture. One of the key initiatives is expanding the Korea Season, a project dedicated to promoting K-culture, sports, and tourism worldwide by organizing a wide range of programs in a selected country throughout the year. Currently held in a single country, with this year's edition running in France, the festival will soon take place in around 10 countries each year. The ministry also plans to open 10 overseas branches of the Korea Creative Content Agency by the end of this year, increasing the total to 25. By 2027, the goal is to have 50 branches worldwide.
The sky is still clear today and the sun shined hard during the daytime. The weather was hotter in areas on the East Coast today. Gangneung moved up to 32 degrees Celsius, as hot as midsummer. However, temperatures there will drop tomorrow as easterly winds flow in. You need to take good care of your body in these fickle weather conditions. On the other hand, central parts of the country and Gyeongsang-Buk-do province will have light rain with lots of clouds tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, there will be less than 5 millimeters of rain in central and northern Gangwon-do province. At one point in the afternoon, showers will pass through parts of inland areas of west and south Gangwon-do province. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daegu will start off at 16 degrees. Highs will move up to 25 in Seoul and Busan, Gwangju 30 degrees. It is expected to rain across the country this upcoming weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is all for this newscast tonight. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the latest news at 9 a.m. tomorrow with New Day at Arirang. Good night.